So you guys opened the show talking about Patrick Mahomes and that quarterback list, that survey that ESPN put out. Another one of the questions that came out in that 103 anonymous player survey was that who's the most overrated? We did that yesterday. Josh Allen winning that one. Most underrated, though, reigning NFC champion quarterback, Brock Purdy. Now, Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, went from that to becoming a Pro Bowl. Some might call him an all-pro caliber player. And yet, he is still viewed, at least amongst his peers, as being underrated as an NFL quarterback. Your thoughts, Martin Weiss?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that you can consider I don't think there's any way you consider Brock Purdy underrated. Not at this point in time. When you consider, especially towards the end of the last season, the names in which he's discussed with, like Patrick Mahomes, I was about to say Chris Broussard because I just saw him pop in. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott.
How is he discussed with those guys?
Because they were in the MVP conversation.
But he's not. I agree with you that I don't think, for the most part. Now, I sit across from Nick Wright every day on First Things First, and I think he does underrate Brock Purdy. But for the most part, I agree with you that people have seemed to come around on Purdy, and he's not underrated at this point. I mean, like you said, he was fourth in the MVP race. That's a lot of love and respect.
Yeah, I don't think there's any case that he's underrated. I think he's a little bit overrated, but I think if you look at Sando's tiers, right? We just talked to him, obviously, at the bottom of last hour. Check the podcast to hear that. But if you look at the definition of tier one, it goes, a quarterback can carry his team each week. The team wins because of him. He expertly handles pure passing situations, has no real holes in his game. I don't think that applies to Brock Purdy at this moment.
Well, he's not in tier one.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think he's under. I think
there's only three dudes in tier one.
But I think he's squarely, properly rated in tier two because I don't think that the team wins because of him. Whereas in the guys in tier one, Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, I think that is the case, right? I think it's also the case for Lamar Jackson.
That's
for what
why
it's worth.
Lamar should have been in tier one as well. Yeah, look, Purdy in the players, top 100 poll that ESPN does, was the 8th rated quarterback. That's a lot of respect. We talked about 4th in the MVP voting. He was 7th in he was tier 2 in this poll. Now, he was ranked 12th in the athletics poll overall, but still a tier 2 guy. And so I agree with you that that's about right. But there are those out there that are still hating. And like I said, I deal with Nick a lot on this, and he represents a lot of the people's views about Purdy. And they're like, we want to see him get it done without, as Nick calls them, the Avengers, the great supporting cast. Here's what I would say, Martin. Outside of Patrick Mahomes, and when Mahomes entered the starting lineup, he had a stacked situation. He went to an 11-win team that was in the playoffs.
Right.
I'm talking about when he took over and started. He had Andy Reid as his offensive genius. He had Travis Kelce, who already was a Pro Bowler. Kareem Hunt, who was a star at the time at running back. And Tyreek Hill, who was a Pro Bowler. All right, so he had plenty of weapons himself. Josh Allen has had a Stephon Diggs. Tua, who was rated lower than has been essentially rated lower than Purdy. He's got Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane and all that he has. Aaron Rodgers for the last several years had Devontae Adams. My point, look at Joe Burrow's supporting cast. And I'm not saying these guys aren't better than Purdy. But my point is that outside of Mahomes, tell me, and I would even throw in Lamar, because Lamar really hasn't had a great receiver yet.
Yep.
But outside of those two, who's the guy, who's the quarterback that's wrecking shop that doesn't have a lot of great help around him? It's not just Purdy.
No, Matthew Stafford had a hell of a year last year. C.J. Stroud had a hell of a year last year. Those are two guys that I think would be better than Brock Purdy if you just laid them all out like situation agnostic and you took away all their weapons. But I think that
Stafford could. Now he put up numbers in Detroit. He also had Calvin Johnson, but he won with the great Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp. Now you got Puka Nacua. Now, a lot of people think he's making him.
I was about to say, I think Puka Nacua is a benefit of having Matthew Stafford as his quarterback. Think if Lamar Jackson was his quarterback, we'd still be talking about how he has no great receivers.
That's arguable. But that's possible, I should say. That's possible. But, but most of these guys have great receivers. It's not just, look at what Jalen's got. Jalen Hurts. My goodness.
100%.
So it's not just Purdy, but Purdy, and I get it. Purdy is largely a victim of where he was drafted. If he was like the third pick in the draft or the third quarterback even if he was a fourth-round pick or better, I think people probably would be completely sold on him at this point.
If he had the same draft capital or was drafted at the same pick that Justin Herbert had been picked, for example, I think that the vast majority of these, like just going off of Sandoz tiers, because that's what's hot right now, he'd be probably sixth, right?
Right.
He'd be sixth in the ranking, borderline first, second tier.
And I get, but I do get that. And I even, I want to see what he does this year because I don't like the vibes in San Francisco. Obviously, you got the situation with Ayuk. Even more worrisome is the situation with Trent Williams. They got to get that done if they want to have any hope.
Right.
But it just doesn't seem like things are going smoothly for them. And I think, they're a team that has been healthy the last couple years for the most part. But Debo he feels due for an injury or two. And I don't want this to happen, obviously, to these guys, but Christian McCaffrey, injuries was his biggest problem in Carolina. He's been healthy since he got to San Francisco, but is that going to continue, especially when you think of the amount of touches he had over the last 2 years in San Francisco? So it's going to be interesting because I don't think things are going to run as smoothly for them as they did last year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it depends on how well your quarterback plays, right? Because then it could run just as smooth as last year because a great quarterback can help cover up a lot of the holes around a team. Like C.J. Stroud walked into the Houston Texans, who had won 3 games the year prior. And it's not that, primarily, largely the same roster outside of the draft picks, right? You add a guy like Robert Woods, but there's not too many different, add a guy in the draft, Tank Dell, right? Will Anderson. Those are all rookies.
Tank Dell is good.
But Tank Dell was a rookie.
Nico.
Will Anderson was a rookie.
Nico had that. Now, he unlocked that in Nico. I agree.
But that's what I'm saying.
I agree. Like, C.J. Stroud's different.
He covers up a lot of holes that were on that Texans roster. Now, they've since tried to plug him. But in this first year.
And beyond the skilled players, look at his offensive line.
Right.
His offensive line was in flux almost the whole season, and he still was able to overcome it. So I agree. That's a different level, possibly. It feels like it's a different level of quarterback. But, again, some of that is based on he didn't have the supporting cast that Brock had. He came in as a higher draft pick. He was a superstar in college, so you get the benefit of the doubt for that. But, yeah, C.J. Stroud is terrific. But it'll be interesting to see what Purdy does. I'll say this because we talked about it yesterday. Josh Allen was voted most overrated. I'm going to say that the most overrated, and I like this quarterback, Martin. I think he's very good. But when you look at what he's achieved, you look at the fact that over the last few years he's gotten his statistics, his production has gotten worse. In 4 years in the league, he's only made the playoffs once and lost that game in dramatic fashion. Justin Herbert.
I agree.
Again, I really like him. But the last 3 years in the athletics tiers, he's been the 5th-ranked quarterback in the league, including this year. He was tied with Matt Stafford. He was tier 1 the last 2 years. Now he got dropped down to tier 2. Right now, when you look at the accolades, I feel like he fits that overrated bill even more than Josh Allen.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the first hour, right? When we're talking about how what builds up a GOAT, like what makes a GOAT. Some of it is ability, obviously, like what happens on the field, but a lot of it has to do with accolades. Like Justin Herbert, to me, is similar in Josh Allen. They got more ability in their left pinky toe than a lot of people have in their whole bodies, right? But it doesn't not to say it doesn't matter, but when you get to that point where your ability is so high, now we're going to be looking at your accomplishments to see, well, where are you? Nobody is looking at Gardner Minshew being like, where's your playoff wins, right? Because we don't expect that out of him from his ability, right? But when you look at guys like Herbert, guys like Allen, you want to say that these guys are overrated. Part of the reason is because we see so much arm talent and just raw physical ability out of these guys that when it gets to the playoffs, it says, okay, well, what happened? Right? Well, where did all this go that we saw in week 7 and week 8? Like Justin Herbert getting his ribs crunched against the Chiefs, rising up 2 plays later and throwing that strike down the middle of the field, like 60 yards in the air. I thought he should have came out the game. And sure enough, he goes and makes a humongous, great play. But when it comes down to in the biggest moments, that's what separates the best from the very good. I think Josh Allen and Justin Herbert fall squarely in the very good category, similar to Lamar Jackson in the same boat, because of the ability, like when you see the accolades, when it comes time to try to go get them, they seem to fall short.
Yeah, I mean, they have time. But right now, I mean, Herbert, I can't even put him in the class with Lamar Jackson.
No, I wouldn't either.
You know, I mean, Lamar with the MVPs, Lamar to the AFC Championship game. He's got more playoff victories. I mean, Herbert doesn't have any yet. And it'll be interesting because I like the Chargers. I toyed with picking them to make the playoffs. I just don't think they have enough right now. They're going to run the football a lot. You can just look at the personnel. I'm not impressed with the receiving core that they've put together. And they obviously lost their 2 best receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So it'll be interesting to see what type of year Justin Herbert has this season.